Marcel here with another video from PTontheNet. What I'd like to ask you today is to join me on an exercise of critical thinking. To join me in choosing to see a different perspective in terms of functional training, and in particular the role that the brain plays in functional training during usage of functional training tools, especially handheld functional training tools. Now, functional training, of course, is one of the greatest revolutions in fitness industry history. And over the past 10 to 15 years or so, we've gone from an industry focusing primarily on muscle building to really knowing quite well how to improve function in our clients through training. And much more than just focusing on muscle function, we're slowly learning that there are numerous mechanisms involved in movement training. The evolution of movement training has not gone without its challenges, of course, but we are slowly but surely putting those pieces of the puzzle together. And one such puzzle that really fascinates me is the role that the brain plays in movement. And over the past 2 decades, we've been able to accurately map out these neurological pathways involved in initiating movement, meaning that how the brain sends signals from the premotor cortex to, which is actually located in the frontal lobes, down into the muscles and makes those muscles move. However, what actually happens when signals are sent back from the body into the brain in response to movement is an entirely different story altogether. And in particular, what actually happens in the brain when we hold on to a training tool in our hands. Now, this is an image of homunculus, which means an area of the cortex where body surfaces are mapped out. And scientists have been mapping out these areas of the brain for many decades. And the first diagram was actually done by a guy called Wilder Penfield in the 1940s. So what I would like to illustrate with this image is the amount of neurons in the brain dedicated to the face and to the hands. And notice in that image how large the hands and face are compared to the trunk and the limbs. And to illustrate this even further, here's another image showing a statue of homunculus. And this is a great image showing the body parts with the most amount of neurons and attention in the brain. And here again, you can really see how much attention there is on the hands, showing that the hands are really the body's and the brain's most valuable tool. So the theory that I pose here is looking at these vast amount of neurons dedicated to the hands versus the rest of the body. What happens in our clients' brains when we introduce a new handheld functional training device? The moment a client grabs this new tool, imagine the tremendous surge of information entering into the brain. So the moment the client holds this new tool, what body part becomes the brain's primary focus? And from a movement training perspective, do we mostly drive movement from the hands, or do we drive it from the body? And of course, that's from the body. So with such an influx of information rushing into the brain, really, how efficient is that brain going to be at initiating movement from the body? So to illustrate that further, here's another image showing an MRI of the left side of a person's brain during a simple but not yet mastered physical task, such as using a hammer to hit a nail. And these colorfully highlighted areas are the areas utilized during that simple task. And these areas are all dedicated to doing things like planning and executing movement while simultaneously sensing the body's movements in space. And if this is what happens in a stationary position, how would the brain be able to effectively dedicate attention to the areas of the body involved in movement? In other words, is it advisable to hand a client a new training tool and commence immediately with high movement drills holding this tool? Well, in his Viper course, Marcel Daane is very clear that when learning a new movement with a Viper, it should be rehearsed first without a Viper. And based on this information, his recommendations are spot on. Because regardless of what type of movement tool you are using, you have to make sure that the client rehearses those physical movements without a tool first, so that that person can develop the proper neurological pathways, because there's so many more neurons in the hands versus in the body. Going back to that client, once that movement is mastered, introduce a light tool first and be very diligent that the client initiates movement from the body and not from the hands. Start by doing these movements slowly and gradually, and progressively build speed and dynamics. Start with basic movements first and constantly assess what body part is the center of focus for the client. The moment that that focus and that attention shifts to the hands first, the trainer must intervene. So over time, as the brain develops these accurate neurological pathways, speed and complexity can be introduced to elicit the appropriate physiological and neurological responses. So I hope this helps make using your movement training tools even more effective, and hopefully those tools will then help developing those accurate neurological pathways in your clients. Thank you very much.